letting go of the dead. The first person I knew who died was my grandmother. She was a hard-drinking German-American woman in her late 60s. No one else around me was anywhere near that old. My parents were in their 40s, so my general assumption, even at age 8, was that she was going to die soon. I remember making an extra effort to be nice to her because I figured she was going to die soon. My last glimpse of her was her waving down to me from her 6th floor hospital window. They didn't let kids in to visit in those days, and my thinking that she wasn't going to be getting out of there. Because I also didn't know anyone I'd ever seen again after they were in the hospital. A few days later, my mother picked me up at school and told me she had something to tell me. Somberly, she told me that Mum had passed away. I grew quiet and adopted a mournful cast because I knew this was my chance to get comic books. At that age, my #1 mission at all times was to get comic books. Ireland's newsstand, an enclosed shop stuffed with all the latest magazines and newspapers and comic books, was 6 miles from my house. But getting there was like a grail quest. It took persistence and cunning. I was going to miss my grandmother, but it wasn't like I hadn't been expecting her death. If I played up the grief a bit, I sensed I could get comic books. Do you think I could get a comic book? I asked plaintively. Not 10 minutes later, there we were at Ireland's, a glorious copy of Justice League of America number 85 in my hands, a giant-size 64-page issue. I missed my grandmother, and I'm sure my father did too. But years later, my much older brother told me that Mum had been a thorn in my side. And my sensible but firm mother, capable of working well with anyone, told me that one day she got drunk and told my grandmother off but good before passing out in the bedroom. The next person I knew who died was my Uncle Hen. Uncle Hen, the husband of my mother's older sister Betty, was ancient and frail. We drove 6 hours to Johnstown, Pennsylvania for his funeral. I remember being mostly bored. I have a firm memory of sneaking into the basement of the funeral home and seeing another dead body in wait down there and then running back upstairs to tell my assorted cousins my age about it. At this point, who knows if this really happened? Aunt Betty cried a lot, and my mother and her other sisters consoled her. Not too long after that, my Uncle Art, the husband of another of my mother's sisters in Pennsylvania, went out to trim the roses and died in the heat. Uncle Art always smelled like cigars and was a large, welcome, friendly presence. I knew I would miss him. But so far, letting go of these dead people was easy. As the youngest child of the youngest child, I was surrounded by aunts and uncles far older than me. They began to drop like flies. Uncle John, Uncle Adam, Aunt Min, Aunt Rose, Aunt Betty, Aunt Jin, Uncle Heine, Uncle Harry, Aunt Alma, and some others whose names I have to admit I can't remember. My Aunt Anne's death was the saddest. Hospitalized for something or other, they removed her foot. Then they took off more. Finally, the entire leg. Then the other foot. Then more of that leg. As they drew closer to her torso, I guess she just gave in. Talk about letting go. She died by inches. Here's a life lesson. Out of 22 aunts and uncles I can recall, I now have 1 left. It makes sense, but still, it's astonishing. Sometimes I wonder, as I have with all the dead people I've known, where did they go? Other deaths happened around me. After high school graduation, a kid I knew somewhat died in a motorcycle accident. I can't remember his name. In college, a girl I knew a little bit, she slept with the guitarist in my band, killed herself. The guitarist wrote a song about it called "She Killed Herself." It was one of our best songs and always went over well. The following year, the bassist in our band died. He was 24, just like me. That shook me up. He was in a band with me, and he was the same age as me, and he did some drugs like me. And now he was dead from drugs, it seemed, but I wasn't. The guitarist and I went to his funeral service where the priest told all assembled, including the dead bassist's devastated parents, that this was God's will. I couldn't figure out how that was God's will or what it said about that God, so I wrote a short story about my inability to figure it out. It got published, and I won an award. A year or two after I moved to California from New Jersey, I was called back home. My father was hospitalized, and we were all going to sit down with the doctor for a family meeting. It turned out that Dad had cancer, and he wasn't going to be getting any better. He had the proverbial 3 months to live. As it wound up, he defiantly lasted 2.5 years and was every bit as strong-willed and ornery as ever. At one point, that stern German Lutheran mother of mine confided into me, "I wish the good Lord would just take him." When, finally, I got the call from my mother that my father had died just then in the hospital, I was playing Risk on my computer. Even as she told me, I started invading another country. I really didn't have anything to say. Then for a couple of years, as a friend had warned me I would do, I behaved as an utter asshole. Evidently, this happens when your parent dies. You become angry and behave like an utter asshole. One day, I wrote the entire second act of a play I was working on, drinking whiskey and smoking cigars while writing it. And when I wrote end of play, I had a feeling wash over me. I was done with the death of my father. I hadn't even realized I'd been working on it, but now I was done with it. I started calling people and apologizing. Since then, death has continued its inexorable march into my life. A friend killed himself, a former lover died from cancer, a mentor died from cancer, and the next to last aunt died rail thin and twisted up in a hospital bed in Philadelphia. Lately, my cousins, my age cohort, have been dying, and indeed yesterday I got an email that another cousin had died. Last year, the guitarist in my band died. He was my age, but 30 years of hard smoking and heavy drinking and drugs will do that. I had always assumed that he and I would get back together and make music again, but he's dead, the bassist is dead, I don't know where the drummer is, so I guess there will be no reunion of the art punk band named I Don't Know. Here is what I have learned the hard way. I now view my dead loved ones the way I view the possessions in my house. I wish a big truck would come and take them all away because they exert a power over me I wish they didn't have. To embrace life, to truly live, I have to let them go.